Hey guys, what is up, and welcome to my first part of an introduction to tanking series for WoW. I've decided to make this because new expansion just came out recently, and I've kind of looked around at what other tanking guides there are, and there's a lot of them that are from Mythic Raiders, and they just don't really cover what I think is important for people who are just getting into tanking. And not to say the other ones are bad, I do recommend you go watch as many tanking guides from different people as possible. But I thought I might just make this one for the kind of true beginner's guide for someone who's either new to WoW completely or just new to tanking. They never tanked before. If you're an experienced tank, I don't expect you to get much out of this. If you've tanked, especially this first part, even if you've tanked like one dungeon, you're probably not going to get too much out of this video. You might get a little bit, especially if you're a bit lost, dying a lot, taking a lot of damage, something like that. But yeah, this is really for people who have never tanked before or have only tanked maybe like one or two dungeons and were just a bit lost. One thing I did want to mention, if people are worried about if I'm worthy of giving advice about tanking, remember I'm here to teach people basically how to tank your weekly key and your normal heroic rating level kind of stuff. I'm not here to teach you how to mythic raid or anything like that. And that's the problem I kind of saw with a lot of other ones, is it's mythic raiders trying to teach people how to get into tanking, and it's a very different world, mythic raiding and heroic and normal raiding level. They're two very different levels, and you just get very wacky device that I wouldn't actually give to a normal heroic raider that's trying to get into it. The first thing with tanking is obviously choosing a tank. The ones I would recommend for beginners are definitely the Warrior, Druid, and Paladin. They're the most kind of easiest tanks to pick up. That being said, definitely choose based on what you think you're going to enjoy playing. And the reason for that is just if you enjoy the tank more, you're going to want to play it more, you're going to have fun with it, you're going to want to improve more as well. The reason I don't recommend the others, like especially Blood DK, I wouldn't recommend for a beginner. That's personally my main, is the Blood DK. The problem with it is it's got very unique ways of mitigating damage. It doesn't really mitigate in the same way, and we'll get into mitigation in a minute on what mitigation is. If you haven't tanked, you're probably not going to be very familiar with the term. And there's a few things that might kind of scare people off of tanking, or they might be concerned about when they get into it. And the first one is like probably just knowing the dungeon and knowing the route to take, the layout of it, mechanics and stuff like that. And this is just something you're going to pick up from playing the dungeons. If you're really worried about it, by all means, go watch guides online of just the basics. They'll take you through, roughly what the mechanics are of bosses and the routes through dungeons in some of them and stuff like that. Especially when you're jumping into normal and heroic dungeons, don't worry too much about the route or the mechanics. Most of the time, especially the normal heroic, the DPS and healers kind of just gotta walk the correct direction to go anyway. You can kind of follow them and then just pull the trash that's in front of them. Eventually, you'll learn the route through. And if you've DPS them, you're probably gonna roughly in the back of your head just kind of know the route through. As for mechanics, that's when I would probably recommend either just testing it in the dungeon and seeing what happens, using add-ons that scream at you when you're about to get hit really hard. So as a tank, when the tank smash is about to come, it's just the ability that a boss does that's going to hit the tank really hard. A lot of the time, these add-ons will like scream at you to press a defensive. But yeah, by all means, watch tutorials or guides on dungeons if you really want to. But by all means, especially in normal heroic, just jump in and kind of mess around, see what hurts, see what doesn't. Another thing you probably might be concerned about is having to hold threat, and just, I guess, also being a leader of the group. A lot of the time people look at the tank to be the leader. Not always the case. It's quite often I've seen DPS that will kind of take charge, or even a healer that will take charge. But yeah, a lot of the time people will look to the tank. Don't stress too much about it. Usually, at the very least, there'll be a DPSer in there that knows what's going on, and you can... they'll tell you where to go. Some people are a bit rude, but a lot of people won't mind. They're there to finish the dungeon, and if having to explain something to you helps them achieve that goal, they're just going to explain it to you. A lot of them won't mind. I don't DPS very often, but if I do and the tank's a bit lost, I don't mind helping them. Maybe that's because I'm a tank player myself, but yeah, obviously having to hold threat, a lot of people get really concerned about this. They think it's this stressful job. You basically just DPS when it comes to holding threat. As long as you're pressing your buttons, you're going to be holding threat for the most part. In normal heroic, you might have some problems of overgeared players being in there that just nuke everything and just have threat all the time. Don't stress that if that player's overgeared, the trash probably can't kill them anyway. On a boss, you might want to hold threat, just press your taunt. Every single tank has a taunt ability. They kind of nerfed the description on taunt. Basically, taunt, you'll have a few seconds where the boss you'll be the highest on the threat for the boss, and you'll also be doing increased threat to the boss, or not the boss, whatever you taunt, so you can taunt trash and stuff like that as well. So you taunt something, it can basically only target you for a few seconds, and you're dealing increased threat. No one else can deal threat to it in that time. It's very hard for people to pull threat off you after you've taunted something. And don't try and play with taunt too much. Use it when you need it, but don't rely on taunt. Don't taunt on pull. Is one thing I would say. So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to get through at the beginning. If you are worried about, holding threat, getting into a tank might be a little bit different in terms of kind of what your rotation is. Tanks don't have a set rotation in the way that DPS do, as far as I know. I will be honest, I don't really DPS. I've DPS'd one raid tier and I did not enjoy it. No, 2 raid tiers actually. Didn't really enjoy it. Swap back to tank and now I'm a permanent tank. So yeah, talking about your rotations and stuff, basically every class kind of has their handful of kind of base abilities that you kind of just spam or press on cooldown or whatever it might be. And these are your abilities that you're going to be pressing the most to basically hold threat and do TPS. That's another thing. As a tank, you may be thinking you're sitting there trying to hold threat. You're actually just kind of really DPSing at the end of the day while worrying about a few other things. You have to sidestep some abilities, and we'll get into that stuff later on in this video, or maybe even later in the series, depending on what dungeons we get and whatnot. But these kind of base abilities that you want to be worrying about. First of all, when you choose your tank, go through and just read all the abilities, read your talents that you're selecting. Feel free to follow a guide on choosing your talents. Personally, I follow guides for your talents for all tanks other than my main, which is the Blood DK. Blood DK, I'll choose my own talents. I know everything about that class. Not everything, but enough to feel comfortable enough choosing my talents. Other classes, thanks, wow. Other classes, I will follow a Wowhead guide on what talents to choose. But yeah, read your abilities so you understand what they do. So yeah, these kind of base abilities that you want to be looking at on these classes. For the warrior, you're looking at Shield Slam, Thunderclap, and Revenge. These are your kind of main rotational abilities that you're going to be pressing. Thanks. The Blood DK, you got Blood Boil, Marrow Rend, which is more about mitigation rather than... Blood DK is very confusing for a new tank, so don't worry about too much, but Marrow Rend's one of them. Heart Strike and Death Strike are your kind of main abilities that you're going to be pressing a lot. The Druid is going to have Mangle, Thrash, Swipe, and Moonfire. Paladin has Blessed Hammer, Judgment, Avenger's Shield, Consecration. Monk has a lot when I was looking at it. You got Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, Breath of Fire, Rushing Jade Wind, and Keg Smash. I believe Rushing Jade Wind is still a talent choice. You don't technically always have that one. I haven't looked too much into it for Dragonflight, but I think that's how it still worked. And then the Demon Hunter has Infernal Strike, Fracture, Soul Cleave, and Immolation Aura as your kind of main abilities you'll be pressing. But again, just read your abilities. You'll probably pretty easily figure out which ones are the ones that you're going to be constantly pressing as your main rotation. For the most part, that's all I want to talk about before actually jumping into a dungeon. And one thing with this series is basically I'm going to be trying to teach you while doing a dungeon or a raid encounter. So we'll probably do some LFR later, but we'll start off with some normal heroic dungeons, just going through. And I'm just going to explain basically what I'm doing and explain things so you kind of understand what's going on. Forgive me, I am recovering from a cold right now, by the way. But yeah, so I think that's everything I wanted to get into before jumping into a dungeon, so we'll jump in now. Oh, would you look at that? Random heroic, I get a little bonus. That's another thing as a tank, you're going to be getting these little bonuses for queuing for these things a lot of the time. Maybe that's why you want to do it. And you get the occasional 1,000 gold and free consumable. What's it called? Augment room. There we go. So we're going to jump in. Oh, sweet. So first thing I'm going to do is just make sure the whole group is kind of here. And then I'm just going to go start pulling. And as mentioned, I'm just basically going to be pressing those abilities that I pointed out before and keeping up active mitigation, which is the next thing I want to talk about. Is every single class is going to have some form of something called active mitigation. It's basically just the way that you negate damage from enemies onto you. So the warrior, for example, that I'm playing here has shield block, which basically makes it going to block all auto attacks that the mobs are doing. Make sure I'm going the right way here. That's another thing, you just bring up the map and see where you're going. Just gonna use that here. So yeah, mitigation, you want to, depending on the class, you basically want as high to 100% uptime as possible. So on the warrior, you can have a pretty good uptime on shield block. The warrior also has another one in ignore pain, and I guess in a way spell reflect. Well, this room, it looks fun. So yeah, I'm just watching the little weak aura here for tracking how long I have left on my shield block. When it runs out, maybe wait a second or so, and then I'm going to press the button again just to get it back up, just so I'm negating as much damage as possible. And then besides that, I'm literally just pressing Thunderclap, Shield Slam, and what is this one called? Revenge. You see here, I'm keeping up the pace a little bit. DPS is pretty decent in this group. And active mitigation also comes in when it comes to tanking bosses all the time. I mentioned before the tank smash, the hit that the boss is going to do that's going to absolutely destroy the tank's health. What you want for that is you're going to want one of your active mitigations up for that. On the warrior, I'm most likely going to want ignore pain up for that ability, the tank smash. The reason for that is a lot of the time shield block isn't going to block the tank smash because it's not an auto attack. And basically what you're trying to do there is, as the tank, you want to take as little damage as possible all the time. So with the tank smash, sure, especially on normal heroic, you probably survive it easily without using any kind of cooldown. But you want to press your active mitigation just to help out with it, take stress off your healer. And it's kind of, yeah, one of the few things that you do as a tank, so it's something you should be thinking about. And like you can see here, I literally just jumped into this dungeon and just started going for it. Like, don't think too much into it. I obviously opened my map at the beginning to make sure I was going the right way. And I'll be honest, I don't even know what the tank smash is on this guy. I don't know if this guy has a tank smash. That's a little awkward, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, as a tank, you kind of need to know, as you get higher up anyway. Like, on normal heroics, you probably don't really need to know the mechanics, because you're just gonna... As the tank, you're not really gonna die from mechanics unless it is a tank-specific mechanic, and even then, like I mentioned, the tank smash, you're probably not gonna die from. Do I have leap? I do. And here, I'm just going to be keeping an eye on the group, letting them catch up here. You never want to pull without your group, especially without your healer. And that's another thing to keep in mind is your healer's mana. You want to make sure they always have enough mana for the pool that you're going into. There we go. And here, shield block up, and then I'm just basically DPSing. So one thing I'm doing here is I'm trying to group. Okay. Oh, I see those were connected. That's fun. I'm trying to group everything up in something that I was taught to be called the death ball. Depending on how long you've been playing WoW, you may be familiar with that term. And basically what the death ball is it just means you want to group up all the trash all as closely together as possible. Am I going the right way here? I absolutely am. Yeah, you want to group up all the trash as neatly and closely together so all your DPSs can cleave them all as easily as possible. Get them all in their cleave spells, AoE spells, and whatnot. It just means everything's going to die a lot quicker, a lot easier. It's all good things. Again, just keeping shield block up. And we pulled more here. And again, I'm not worried when extra stuff gets pulled. It's really not a big deal. See, there more stuff got pulled that I didn't intend to pull. Didn't even bother. Just went over one thunderclap. Boom, got threat on it all. Easy. Do not stress. That's another thing about tanking, I would say, is don't stress. Stressing is just going to make you play worse. And then you might not be able to get threat on those ads that got pulled. You're too busy stressing to press the right button. And like I showed there, literally all it took was one thunderclap, and they were glued to me. Here's something you have to sidestep. You can see they did a bit of a cast, and then just kept attacking in front of them. And sidestepping just basically means it's pointed at you, you're just going to hold left or right, move in that direction. Oh, I was not supposed to thunderclap there. Well, there you go. There's your mistake for the video. Yeah, so it's going to point it at you, and you're... for a ability like that, that's targeted on the tank, yeah, you're just going to sidestep out of it. That's why it's called a sidestep. Because you just walk left or right to get out of the ability. I think we might see this guy do it. Here it is, yep, see, he's doing it, and I'm just going to move out of it. That kind of brings into the next point, is always face everything away from the group. You never want anything faced towards the group. I'm going to pull these guys with it. And the reason you pull stuff away, point stuff away from the group, stop that guy, is for those sidestep abilities like that. Anything that's going to target the tank and do some kind of cleave, AoE, or whatever, you don't want to point that into your DPS so they don't have to move. And they might not even be aware of the ability because tanks are meant to point it away from the group, that they won't know to move out of it and then just die from it. As a tank, you can usually take those hits that you can sidestep as well. You can usually take at least a couple of ticks of damage from it, but obviously, ideally, you want to be avoiding as much damage as possible. It's kind of, in a way, it's your job as a tank, but don't stress too much if you get hit by stuff. Every tank gets hit by things they're not meant to. Again here, sidestepping out of that. That one's not always pointed at the tank, I don't think, but still something to keep in mind. Now this one is something where sometimes the tank will have to do something. So here, this chain needs to be brought through the boss. This guy seems to know what's going on. That really had to do that right then. And there's going to be something. Sometimes if your group doesn't know what's going on, you just have to kind of drag the boss into the chain yourself as the tank. Just one of those things you'll pick up, you'll understand over time. Especially if you're DPS and you know the mechanics of this fight, you know that chain needs to be brought through the boss. You see someone not doing it, you just pull the boss to the chain. So I'm going the wrong way. Oh, wait, this way. I went the wrong way. Don't mind me. See, and like there, I went the wrong way. Didn't stress about it, just corrected it. That guy realized that I corrected it. Maybe he didn't know the way through, or he just forgot like me. I think this is probably the dungeon I've done the most in this expansion, honestly. So I should know where to go. And as a DK main, I really appreciate the mobility that I have. Oh, sidestepping that. So yeah, these guys don't want to move. That's another thing. In regards to that death ball I was talking about, you want to bring any melee ads over to the ranged ads, or if you're like a DK, you can grip the ranged ad and have the melee come to where you want them. Otherwise, you got to do shenanigans of like one thing you can get used to as a tank. If there's a caster and it's not coming into the group, especially if there's two casters, you need, they're spread out and you want to get one near the other. Oh, hi. You can actually interrupt them, and when you interrupt them, there's a short period of time where they can't cast again. And then you use that time. They basically have to melee you, and you just simply use that time to move them over to the group or the other caster or whatever it may be. Another thing you can use is line of sight. If a mob can't hit you, it's going to try and move to a position where it can hit you. So won't really get to use it in here. But one thing you can do is use the use of line of sight to actually get them to move. So like, if you had something doing a cast here, right? And I'll show you when this trash dies. So if one of these were a caster and it wouldn't move in where you wanted it, you can come hide behind this corner. They won't be able to hit you. They'll have to walk around the corner to get to you, and then they're part of the death ball. Obviously, I'm talking quite calmly about a lot of this stuff because I've been doing it for years at this point. And that's the thing. As you kind of tank more, you'll slowly get used to all the things that you need to think about as a tank, and you just kind of do it on autopilot. Which is why I had to make notes about things to bring up in this video, because there's so much that I just do on autopilot and don't think about now. That guy should die. I'm going to move on to the next trash pack. No, that's another thing. You don't really want your DPS to get bored. So you'll see sometimes I kind of start wandering off before a trash pack is dead. And that's just so once the DPS are done with it, they have something to DPS again immediately or as soon as possible. Obviously here you can't really do it immediately. And then like in this situation, you're going to wait for the group. Make sure they catch up. I'm actually going to do an ignore pain here because I think there's some casters. Could do some spell reflect shenanigans, but and like one thing to note, like I'm not very comfortable on a prot warrior. This is my first time playing prot warrior since BFA, which is what, like 2-3 years ago. And I've just been jumping straight into dungeons, zero care in the world about whether I make mistakes. Now, obviously, that's years of tanking experience. When I play a tank I'm not familiar with, I don't really care. I'm just like, yeah, I'll YOLO it. A demo shout these, even though it's not necessary. Again, I'm just trying to take as little damage as possible, sidestepping that, pressing defensive abilities, even if they aren't really necessary. Like, you saw my health basically didn't move then. And one thing I'm just doing here is basically trying to make sure I tag each of those mobs at least once. Do at least one hit to them. I couldn't thunderclap them all at once. So I kind of threw my weapon at one of them, thunderclapped. I think I hit 3 of them with the thunderclap, and this one is shield slammed the final one. Yeah, thunderclap's on cooldown, so I'm going to use revenge just to try and hit them all with a cleave ability. And now I'm going to thunderclap. And you can see these guys are just bloody casting their breaths all over the place. I'm just going to find a little safe spot to stand. Charging to the next pack. Active mitigation up. Not all classes are you going to have active mitigation the same way that you have it on a warrior. So like blood DK active mitigation is in the form of death striking. So you take the damage and then heal it up. The only time you want to use an actual defensive to stop damage is if you're not going to survive the hit, or if you do a massive pull and your health is going down too fast for you to heal it up. And that's where the use of your what I refer to as the oh shit button, which is basically when the group ninja pulls way too much, or you pull way too much, and you go, oh shit, and you press your major defensive cooldown. No, that's on cooldown. And so, like on the warrior, that's going to be shield wall here. And maybe I'll put up on the screen what class has what oh shit button. It's basically going to be something like anywhere from like a 2 to 5 minute cooldown. And it's going to have some kind of massive defensive capabilities on it. A lot of classes will have like a smaller defensive and then a larger defensive. So like Blood DK has Vamp and then Icebound Fortitude as its kind of 2 defensive. Icebound is like the trio shit button that just stops 30% of damage, I believe. But then it has Vamp, which is on like a 1.5 minute cooldown. With the right talent, you can make that even shorter. Oops. And yeah, so you kind of vamp quite regularly, and then you press Icebound as your issue button. And just in this pack, you saw like one of those mobs, one of the DPS got threat on it. And I didn't care. I didn't even taunt it or anything. I just went and I think it was like a thunderclap and a shield slam, and I got threat back on it. So like, really don't stress too much if someone else gets threat. Just kind of hit that mob a little bit more, and you'll probably get threat back. DPS can survive, especially on this difficulty, at least a few hits from the trash. The boss, I would definitely recommend you taunt it though if the DPS get threat on it. That was close. I always put that, was it Ravager? Yeah, Ravager I almost put in the wrong spot. So you can see here, I'm just like checking ability names because I don't really know them on the warrior very well. In here, whoa, I was too slow. If that was a high key, I would have been dead then. But yeah, that's kind of thing, like, that happens to you and you get knocked like that and you forget to move too early or you don't know what's going on because it's a tank specific thing. A normal heroic, you can make those mistakes. Oh, look at that, a little bit of an upgrade. How nice. Where am I going? Back this way. And I think I've pretty much covered most of the stuff that I wanted to do in this video, so I'll just kind of finish the dungeon and explain anything that's going on, maybe. Another thing I did want to mention was when you're learning to tank, I definitely recommend jumping into pug groups rather than playing with your friends. Having a pocket healer really isn't going to teach you how to tank very well. I learnt through pugging, definitely. But that was because I didn't have a guild at the time, but I think it's definitely good for you. Build up a lot of... You get very used to having to get all the interrupts yourself through stuns and whatnot. I should have leaped there to negate that, but that's fine. Place this down just to get some DPS going. Defensive. Gonna ignore pain here as well just because I'm taking a bit of damage. I'm also gonna demo shout. Sidestep that. Charge? No. So again here, just pointing everything away from the group. Okay, no path available, thanks charge. Yeah, I'm just going to group them all up. Forgot to press my defensive, but that's fine. It's up now and I'm at basically full HP. And also just in a pug, you'll learn to quickly adapt to wild situations. Like ninja pulling happens way more often, and being able to really well be able to adapt to a ninja pull is really good, and you're going to learn that in a pug way more than the group of friends or guild mates that just aren't going to really ninja pull very much. And again, I'm pointing this boss away from the group, even though I don't think he has any kind of cleave, but just doing it to be safe. Yeah, so that's not pointed at the tank, but the group has to get out of that one. Oh, don't need that. Here we go, this guy's gonna die. And there we go. Oh, and I got a shield that is an upgrade. Would you look at that? I'll leave that group. And there we go. So you saw, it's not really too bad to just jump in as tanking. I wasn't very familiar with Warrior. Obviously, I've played a little bit to gear it up to be able to do Heroic. But yeah, I think I pretty much covered everything that is important to kind of get into tanking, especially for normal Heroic or even like a Mythic 0. I will be making kind of like a part 2 and maybe even a part 3 just to cover like getting into Mythic Plus, even getting into raiding specifically, and then maybe even getting to some higher Mythic Plus later. But yeah, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, let me know and I can answer it in the next part or just in the comments depending on the question. And thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, especially if you found this helpful. If you give it a like, that'll let me know that I'm doing a good thing here. Thank you.